All right, everybody. Hello, and welcome to today's session on planning your collaborative investigations and managing them. We have a great session for you planned today. My name is Joe Amditis. I am the Assistant Director of Products and Events at the Center for Cooperative Media. I am really excited to bring this workshop to you today. I really admire and respect the work of our two speakers today, and they have a lot to say on this topic, so strap in. This is going to be about an hour, although we are going to make sure to leave questions towards the end. If you'd like to ask a question throughout this session, you may feel free to do so in the chat. And if you want to ask one out loud or if you want to be recognized, we only have, I think we have 50 people signed up for this. And depending on how many we get, it should be pretty casual, informal setting here. So feel free to use the raise hand reaction at the bottom of your Zoom window. And it'll look like this. Your little handle will pop up, and then one of our hosts we'll call on you and we'll spotlight you and have you come up and ask your question. But like I said, we will be leaving room for questions at the end. So if you can hold it, go ahead and do that. When you're in the chat, make sure that when you are sending messages to people in the chat that the to drop down there, which says to everyone, make sure that that says to everyone or to the person that you'd like to send it to. That way we don't have to worry about you sending DMs when you mean to send it to the whole group, or you sending, even worse, sending to the whole group when you meant to send it as a DM. I think that pretty much covers it. If you have any questions or issues tech-wise or behind the scenes throughout, I'll be monitoring the chat. You can post them there, or you can send me a private message and I'll try my best to help you out as we go forward. With that, also, I will note that this is being recorded, and we will be sending the recording, the transcript, as well as any other documentation or materials from this workshop out to everyone who registered once they're done processing at the end. So if you miss something, if you have to step away, by all means, take care of yourself, do what you got to do. The recording will continue and you'll be able to access it later anyway. So no worries. While we get started and before I hand it over, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself in the chat, tell us who you are, where you're from, what you're doing, what you're excited about, any of that stuff. Nothing too crazy. With that, I will hand it over to our two wonderful presenters. We have Bridget Thoreson and we have Dianna Hunt. Dianna, Bridget, I'll let you take it away from here and let me know if you need anything.
Thanks so much, Joe. I'm so excited to be here and so excited to be co-presenting with Dianna. I'll introduce myself real quickly. Dianna will do the same, and then we'll get started. So I'm the Director of Collaborations for the Institute for Nonprofit News. I've worked here about 2 years. Previous to that, I was at Harkin, which is an audience engagement consultancy. And prior to that, I worked in various editorial roles at a daily community newspaper and then a magazine publisher as well. So I have worked, all told, between Harkin and INN with about 123 news outlets, primarily in the United States, on either audience engagement strategies or collaborations or both, as with the project that Dianna and I worked on together last year. And so I'll be speaking today really largely about the logistics of managing a collaborative investigation, how you set that up, how you approach it, and then be handing off to Dianna to talk about what that work actually looks like in practice at the newsroom. And with that, I'll turn things over to my co-presenter, Dianna Hunt.
Yes, hi folks, I'm Dianna Hunt. I'm a senior editor at ICT, which is formerly known as Indian Country Today. And I have worked for the Houston Chronicle, the Dallas Morning News, assorted newspapers before joining the nonprofit world, and was named Metro editor at the Houston Chronicle 2 weeks before Hurricane Harvey hit. So it's been a fun ride, mostly. When at Indian Country Today, I oversee a team of freelancers, but I also handle most of the projects and collaborations that we do. So it's a juggling act, but it works most of the time. Back to Bridget. You're still muted, Bridget. You're back on.
Thank you, Dianna. Sorry about that. So, Joe, I can't see the chat for some reason anymore, which is very sad to me because I was going to ask everybody to pop in the chat. And so maybe, Joe, I'll make you my chat wrangler if anything of
Absolutely.
interest comes up, if that's okay.
Yeah, I think when you're screen sharing, the floating window that comes up, you should be able to pop it up there, and then also at some point go full screen for your presentation because we could still see your browser thing. But yep, I'll take care of it if anybody.
Let's try this. Thank you. So if anything pops up in the chat of interest, because I can't get that pop-up to come up for some reason, please just let me know. So I was going to start by asking people, let's think of this as a martial arts progression, right? We'll say yellow belt, purple belt in the middle, yellow belt is more beginner, black belt, obviously very experienced. I'd love to just get a sense from the room of how experienced you are with collaborative investigations in particular, because I'm sure there's a ton of expertise in the room that I would like to bring into the conversation today, in addition to sort of the process that I'll be talking through. So please pop in the chat if you feel like you or your organization is more like yellow belt, purple belt, black belt, where you sort of fall along those lines. And then Joe, in a couple minutes, once those responses come in, I will ask you to tell me what people said. So I will walk through real briefly our plan for today. We're going to start by talking about collaboration, what types of collaboration make sense for your particular outlet and your goals. How to find partners. This is something I hear about a lot in my role at INN. And then once you have found those people you want to work with, how you go about working with them equitably and well, and what to do when there is trouble, not if, when. Let's just be real. Finally, how we think about managing the collaboration process. And lastly, freelancers and how freelancers might fit into this. As Joe mentioned, we'll have time for questions at the end, but love to hear questions as we go along. For some reason, oh, there's the chat. It went to my other screen. All right, I found it. So Joe, what is the belt sort of?
It's quite a rainbow. We got a few yellow belts. We got a green belt. We got somebody who has a rust belt, and I would consider myself a purple belt.
I love it. Okay, this should be great for like yellow, green, rust, purple, excellent. And if you do have some more experience, please chime in on the chat. Love to hear from you. Love to hear if there's anything that resonates with you, or also anything that you might have some questions or suggestions about how to improve. So we'll make this a collaborative chat in the spirit of the session today. So when I'm speaking to people about collaboration, because I'm sure other people on the call have experienced this as well, collaboration can be used as a catch-all term. I get some real interesting cold emails about collaborating because it's in my title. It's like, you're trying to sell me something. We talk about collaborations as work that makes reporting possible, and specifically by connecting newsrooms to each other, right? To making this network really operate like a network, and leaning into the unique strengths, skills, and experiences of different outlets. And this is reporting that otherwise might not happen, right? Or be really difficult to happen individually. This will likely look familiar to you if you are familiar with CCM's wonderful guides and work, which I will be referencing throughout today's presentation. What types of collaborations are there? As I quickly go through this menu, I encourage you to take a look and see where you and your work fits in, and in particular, if there are any of these boxes that you're really curious to explore, but you just aren't quite sure how to get started. So really helpfully in this comparing models of collaborative journalism framework, they've set this up in terms of what the participants are doing and whether the collaborations are finite or ongoing. So you've got ones where people are creating content separately. For both categories, you've got ones where people are working together to create content in both categories. And then finally, at sort of the deepest level of collaboration, they're integrated, right? You're sharing content, you're sharing data. You might even be sharing resources, including back-end resources at the organizational level. I'm going to add a little more detail here about what all this entails, and then I'm just going to pause for a moment. And you don't have to share, but just take a look on the screen and think about where you have been in terms of your collaborations, my yellow belts, my blue belts, my purple belts, and where you're interested in going, because I think that'll inform a lot of the questions for today. All right. For the purposes of collaborative investigation specifically, we're going to be focused in this zone, sort of temporary and co-creating and temporary and integrated, because investigations by their nature often involve a lot of, could be data work, could be FOIA requests, so much coordination around those levels. And I know Dianna will have more to say about that. But it could certainly fit into any of these categories. I really love this caution from Sarah at Open Campus, which I probably don't need to say to this room, but sometimes I do, because people are like, I really want to collaborate. And I say, why? And they're like, to collaborate. Okay, but why? So as we're thinking about these investigations, we'll be starting with the goals that you want to have. So here are some things I encourage the newsrooms I'm working with to ask before they start collaborating. Love to see what all you are asking, thinking about as you approach collaborative partnerships. What are your goals for this project? What do you want to get out of it? And everyone I talk to, and I'm sure everyone here knows, collaborations are a ton of work. It's got to be worth your while. And so I always tell, Diana's nodding, I always tell potential participants, like, nothing makes me happier than when someone says, this is not the right fit for me, and walks away. And I say, thank you for saving us all so much time and energy. I think as journalists, we have this drive to make things work no matter what. If it's not working for you, then you don't need to make it work, right? So you got to have a goal at the outset. What could this achieve collaboratively that might not be possible on your own? It's great to work together, but it has to give you something that you wouldn't be able to do individually, because again, it's just such an investment of time and precious resources. Talking about unique strengths, and later I'll share a framework we have found helpful for sort of almost negotiating participant roles in collaborations. And then just be honest and upfront about concerns and guardrails. Like, this works when it's based on trust and honesty, and this is something I hear over and over again. There are very valid concerns. There are collaborations that go badly because someone's not participating in good faith. And so the more you can approach it with that openness, honesty, and transparency up front, I think it just saves everybody a lot of time and agony later. So I'm going to note here again, go back to my favorite chart. Different types of collaborations can be useful for different objectives, right? And this is laid out really well in that comparing models of collaborative journalism handout. So that's something to think about too. Your goal can define the type of collaboration you pursue. All right, and so before I move on from this point, I want to be sure nothing's popped up in the chat that we need to address. Joe.
Nope, looks like we're good.
Right.
Sam says amen, Bridget.
Thank you, Sam. So here's my first promo for CCM. If you haven't checked out their guides in terms of how to build new partnerships for collaborations, do it on this call, do it today. It's tremendous. It's such a valuable concrete resource. And I recommend it to people all the time. Okay, so big question I get. How do I find people to partner with for my collaborations? You have a goal in mind, you know what you want to get out to it. You may even have an idea of what kind of collaboration you want to pursue, or you're looking for opportunities that may already exist out there that you can join to meet your goals. There are a lot of great links here, and Joe, I'm sure you'll be sending out a follow-up after the call so we can provide these links there. But in terms of again, CCM's collaboration database, a great way to see what's going on out there. You can go to journalism membership organizations to see if there are other members there who might want to participate with you. In terms of investigative reporting specifically, of course, Reveal has a reporting network, ProPublica has a local reporting network. And then just to plug INN real quick, you can go to our member directory to find nonprofit newsrooms. It's filterable by topic, by location, by all kinds of things. Or just email us. Like, honestly, we're happy to share. Our collaborations are not limited to nonprofit newsrooms. We really believe it's all about helping everyone achieve the goals that they have as an organization and make a positive impact in the world. So if you might be interested in collaborating with a nonprofit news outlet, we can facilitate those connections. And if anyone else has any other resources, again, share your expertise.
Farah wants to know if you suggest starting in the upper left-hand corner of that Stromboli matrix and then sort of moving to the lower right.
That's a great question.
Or should your goal define the collaboration?
That's a great question. I do encourage, and then Diana, I'll be curious for your thoughts on this too. Especially if you're new to collaborations as an organization, I encourage you to find the low-hanging fruit first, which could be the upper left part of that chart, or put a different way, instead of low-hanging fruit, the less investment of resources for proof of concept. And this could be working with an organization you haven't worked before, just doing something real quick and kind of easy to see how that goes, and if you build it up over time. But so often, I think the organic nature of collaboration and really the relational nature of collaboration. There's a reason people turn to people they trust to do these projects, because you need to build that up over time. So that may look like the upper left-hand corner of that quadrant. It may look like something different, but if you're trying out something, try something where you can test it out first and then invest more later. Dianna, what would you say on that question?
I'll just add real quick that there's a link in the chat to these collaborative journalism tip sheets that we've created based on Sarah's report that'll help you walk through, is this type correct, like good for me or right for me?
Yeah.
Yeah, we're probably not as hesitant to jump in full force as Bridget suggests, and she's no doubt right. But I think when we get a pitch, when we get an idea, my mind goes, what can we do out of this? What's the biggest? And it's the same thing I always did with any investigative story. There's a minimum amount we could do. There's a maximum amount. What's the minimum we could get out of this? What's the biggest? Let's go for the stars. What's the biggest story we can get? And I'm always going to aim for that. If I feel like the basic lowest level story is still worth our time and attention, then that's where I go in. So think about what, either if this is an all or nothing, and if this doesn't pan out, you've wasted your time. You might want to rethink your time and effort. But I go in thinking, what can we do? What mark can we make on this to make this a bigger, better story, bigger, better project? And it takes a while sometimes before we do say, I don't think this is really, I think we're going to pull back a little on this at this point. But keep in mind what you hope to accomplish and what you want to get out of it. I can't stress enough that that's really what you need to do. What do I want? What could I live with? What's not worth my time?
Farah, does that address what you were wondering about? I see a thumbs up. Fabulous. Thank you. So when we have found some people we want to work with, your goals as an organization, we found it really helpful to use sort of negotiation framework. And again, there's a wonderful guide on this. Okay, great, Farah. Fabulous. But thinking about the aspects of the project you want to discuss with your potential partners, what you want the outcomes of these discussions, where you stand basically on these issues. And this may involve conversations within your own newsroom before you talk to people externally. It can always be really interesting to see where there's points of disagreement, even internally, before you have these conversations. Why do you feel this way, right? What's your explanation? And then what's most important for you to accomplish, right? Where is there wiggle room to, find some common ground, and where do you really stand strong? One thing we hear a lot about is mission fit, and how challenging it is to collaborate with organizations who do not have a similar mission to yours. And you can be aligned in every other way in the world, but if one organization is trying to make a public policy impact and another organization is trying to generate clicks, you're going to run into problems. And then finally, just start with what you think your partners might feel about these particular issues. And then you can rank and refine them as you talk. So what this looks like, I almost forgot my most important note here. Again, not only is it okay to walk away, it may save you a lot of pain and time and effort down the road. If something's not the right fit, there will be other opportunities. This is another thing I see a lot. As journalists, we are understandably focused on what's right in front of us, the immediate term, what can we do right now? But there will be other opportunities, right? And they may be better. I had someone just last week email me, be like, oh, thank you so much for reaching out to me for this collaboration. Now's not the right time because XYZ. And I just wrote back to her, great, thank you. I will keep you posted for future opportunities. Like, that is not only fine, that is right, and you should do that. If at any time you're feeling like this is going to be a drain on your resources, just leave it, just leave it. So here's an example of what this can look like. It doesn't have to be a big fancy thing. It can be a simple spreadsheet or document. We're just like, what are the issues we care about for this collaboration? How important are these issues to us? What do I think my partner thinks about these issues? And then you refine it as you go through these conversations. See if you can come to an understanding, right? Typical negotiation framework, but really, really essential to have these conversations up front and not just assume that everyone's going to be on the same page. When you have had these conversations, when you're ready to put together an agreement, we really encourage people to put together MOUs, memorandums of understanding. And they don't have to be fancy, big, legal, scary documents. The one we use at INN is about 1.5 pages. It spells things out pretty simply. And we worked hard to make it very accessible, but especially if you're working in a situation where there's not a designated project manager, like the role I fill in collaborations that we run, it's best just to have a trusted source you can turn back to as you navigate through the collaboration. And again, there's great examples on the Collaborative Journalism website. What are examples of the issues in the chart we just saw? Thank you for that question. It could be so many things. So let's say you want to collaborate around an environmental topic investigation. And let's say you are a small newsroom and a very big newsroom has asked you to partner with them. How will you handle if the big newsroom, say, has a paywall and you are free? Is it really important to you that your content is not behind a paywall? Like, is that an issue for you? So it's like anything that is important to you as an organization in navigating this collaboration, try to think about that up front, right? So what questions, maybe a better way to put it than issues would be, what questions do you have about what it will take to make this partnership or collaboration work? Does that address your question?
There are a couple of chat questions too, Bridget.
Yes, thank you. So one of them I just saw in the chat. And I see, do you share your interests chart with your partners if you're the project manager? Ooh, I love this question. Up to you. It's useful as an exercise to begin thinking through your positions. However, if you feel comfortable with that level of transparency, that's a really nice way to start this partnership, by just being upfront about, here are the things that matter to us. So I would say it's up to you in terms of whether you would share that chart or just keep it internal. Just going to pause there and see if there's any follow-ups.
I think we're good.
Good.
Yeah, and then I just shared some template policies and MOUs there. If you just open those links and you make a copy on Google Drive, you should be able to edit those and adapt them to whatever needs you might have. And let me know if you want any, changes.
Fabulous. All right. This is my favorite project chart of all time. It comes from IDEO. It's called How the Journey of a Project Feels. Raise your hand or pop in the chat if you've ever had a project that starts out full of hope and then plunges into this kind of valley of despair partway through. Yes. Thank you, Sarah. Yes, yes. Oh my gosh. Yes. I love that they call what I said, the valley of despair, insight, that you increase in your insight over time, and that it comes back up. So I share this chart, and I shared at the outset of projects we pursue, because I think the understanding we have when things get difficult in a project is that things are going wrong, right? Things are going badly. However, working together is hard, and it's going to be hard, and you can do all the preparation up front you want, but I really don't want people to blame themselves when they run into obstacles, because the truth is, you're trying something new, you're creating new systems, right? You're working across multiple organizations. Yeah, it's going to be hard. So if we embrace the hard, right? The hard is what makes it great. Then you can kind of flip the way you're perceiving what's happening, and also trust that you will get back up to that place where you have hope again. The project will come together, and along the way you have gained greater insight. I love that. Despair builds character. I should start saying that. Okay, so
let me throw something in there if I can.
Please.
Another thing, when you're down in that deep valley, but listen to yourself, because if something is troubling you or something is bothering you or something doesn't feel right, that's the point to figure out what it is that's bothering you and listen to yourself, because sometimes it's only when I become troubled in the middle of one of these and I can't figure out why, that I figure out what the problem is and we have discussions about it. So don't dismiss it. Listen to yourself.
Yeah, I think that's very wise advice. And so plan for problems, right? If at the outset, you know you're going to encounter obstacles, You can try to plan, and part of it, frankly, is just having the mindset when the problems arise, like, welcome problem. I have been waiting for you to show up. Thank you for coming. One thing to really, really think about is who's going to be responsible for just keeping the trains running on time, right? Deadlines, deliverables, who is that person? Because as much as we would like to trust everybody to manage their own work, you just need that person. You need the wrangler. How are you going to communicate, right? What works internally within your organization may not work with others, and you can just ask people, do you like email? Do you like Slack? Are we going to be having check-ins? Hopefully, yes. But check-ins that are beneficial. We change the cadence of our check-ins over the course of a project, and it's interesting. It's like more upfront, and then usually less around the middle, unless that valley of despair means we have to have lots of check-ins. Valley of insight means we have lots of check-ins to work through a problem, and then more at the end as things are coming together. Because sometimes I hear about collaborations and we're like, we're meeting, we're not really doing anything, right? It's like, it's kind of a waste of time. And also, when disagreements come up, who arbitrates? Like, who is the decider of this agreement? Are you going to have an editorial lead? That's the function that Dianna did on our project. We had 10 outlets come together. She'll tell you more about that. But basically, she was the one calling the shots at the end of the day. And we all knew that at the outset. And then finally, processes. One thing I hear about a lot in collaborations, I'm sure all the yellow, purple, blue belts in the room can relate to this. You get to the finish line and then it's going through round after round of editing and you're like, but when is it done and how can we hold and we've got to publish, and like, just have that discussion up front if you can before you get to that decision point. When is it done? Who gets final edit? How do we work that out? In some cases, for our collaborations, the outlet gets final edit for what they publish, and then the editorial lead, like Dianna's role, gets final edit for what the lead partner publishes, for example. And that's very clear. You clear it with the outlet, but there might be style differences here and there, right? And that's fine. But you have to be clear about that at the outset. Dianna, anything I'm forgetting on this slide before I move on?
No.
We're almost through the logistics part of things. Okay. Managing the process. Here are some roles we've outlined. Again, love to hear what roles you've put together. These can be people at the newsrooms. These can be external, whatever makes sense for the collaboration you're running. Project manager, in terms of the person keeping the train running on time, that's their job, right? They're the one wrangling the calls, setting the deadlines, making sure everybody has all the information they need. That's the role I fulfilled on our collaboration. Editorial lead could be the same person as a project manager. It's a lot of work. I hope whoever is doing this role that their boss knows it's a lot of work. Coordinates the coverage, right? Make sure everything is coming together in a way that's holistic, where the reporting builds on each other and that everyone has the information they need. A newsroom point person for every member of the collaboration. Who is the person who goes on the calls and makes sure everything is coming together, and who also knows how to navigate the systems within their own outlet in terms of those processes.
Let me interject there. That's also the person who will need to deal with any issues that may surface within their own newsroom. So that's not the responsibility of the oversight folks. Each person handles their own internal problems, issues, concerns.
That's a really good point. And you can see the project manager playbook link that Joe just put in there. You can read my old job description in there in terms of project management, and to see sort of how these roles come together. And then finally, there are resources you can share, but you are going to need to figure out how those get shared, with whom, under what guidelines, right? And that's something that really all three of those roles, the project manager, the editorial lead, and the newsroom point person, have a voice in sharing out. And if there are any other roles you can think of, they're specific for collaborations. On the editorial side, right? Please feel free to pop those in the chat. Hey, look, Joe. It's the playbook you just did the link for.
Oh my goodness.
It's great. Emotional support staff. Honestly, yes. I don't know if you were joking, Joe, but I agree.
Nope, I wasn't, but that's also, if I was, I would be filling my role as emotional support staff. So
yeah, I think that makes sense. So real quickly, before I hand things over to Dianna to talk about how this looks like in practice, and again, we welcome your questions and thoughts and anything we're talking about. I'll just talk about specifically what the Institute for Nonprofit News is doing when it comes to collaborations, because again, it's open. You don't have to be an INN member to participate. So my role specifically is around framing and funding project-based collaborations. When those project-based collaborations come together, I'm the project manager. People do seem to find it helpful to have someone who's not at a newsroom. I mean, I always tell people and they love it. I'm like, you know, you can't bother me. I'm not on deadline. Like this is all I'm doing. I'm not being pulled in a million different directions. And then finally, at the conclusion of projects, reporting out the impact from those collaborations. And I must say, what's really wonderful about this role is being able to apply the lessons learned from different collaborations to future projects so that there's a more cohesive understanding about what works and what doesn't work to make impactful journalism possible. We are shifting, which is really exciting. We've been doing largely finite, that sort of left-hand side of the chart projects. Now we're moving to ongoing projects. Our first one is called the Rural News Network around issues in rural America. We've got around 70 newsrooms in 45 states covering it right now, and we'll be launching a website very soon, which is exciting. So we're undergoing a shift as well. And then we're looking for what we can do next, right? So we've partnered with Reynolds Journalism Institute to interview, I want to say it's around 30 newsrooms to create a guide on how community center outlets can create topical collaborations. That'll be coming out probably early next year. But those interviews are in process now, and it's really interesting. We had over 100 newsrooms apply to be interviewed for this. So there's definitely a lot of interest in the field for this. And so that's the conclusion of my part of the show. Again, I'm not on deadline. You can't bother me. So if you're interested in collaborations, please really reach out. My email is just the word bridge with a T at inn.org. I love to hear from people. I love to hear about the projects you're working on, the questions you have, and see if I can facilitate making any connections. And I'll leave that just up on the screen for another second while I hand things off to Dianna.
Yep. Any questions for Bridget before we move into the next phase here? No. Okay. All right. Okay. Yeah, good. Perfect. All right. So I'm here to tell you how some of these have worked or didn't work, or what worked best or what did or didn't work. And so let me run down some of the things that we've done. Indian Country Today has done in the last 2 years. I've been with Indian Country Today now for about 2.5 years and handled more collaborations in the last 1.5 years than initially started. I think it's kind of a buzzword, but there's a real benefit for us and a real benefit for a lot of newsrooms to do that. So the project we did with the Institute for Nonprofit News was at the crossroads. It became an economics project. It started out as we came in as an editorial lead and helped shape the topic that we were going to write about. And we solicited proposals, various organizations stepped in, and yeah, thank you. She's got the link there. That's where you can find all the stories and the follow-ups as well. So we helped shape as the editorial lead, I helped shape what the project, who tackled what. And one of the things that was really important for me was that each partner, we had 9 partners plus Indian Country Today. I felt it was really important for each partner to have its own standalone story, its own story that it would run, that it initiated and wrote and controlled, largely with my input, but that would also meet the same thread of thought that would run through everything. And so we had, we settled on, the state of the economy in Indian Country. What's working? Where are the jobs? What's development? What are the jobs of the future? It largely was jobs, but not completely. And so each of the partners had a piece that they wanted to write about that was particularly relevant to their area, but which was important to the larger effort as well. I think that was really important to have that thread, but have to have the stories to stand alone. I believe Indian Country Today, I think we're the only ones who ran all of them. Most of the partners ran their own, of course, and then several of the others. I don't think they all ran everything except for us. We had Mark Trahant, who is the editor. He's an editor at large now at Indian Country Today. He wrote the overview story, which pulled the concept that we were reaching, pulled all those pieces together and drew portions out. So that's the first story, the overview story. What does it mean and how do we assess the state of the economy? And then we tackled various topics. So with Mark's story, he concluded that billions of dollars, tribal communities contribute billions of dollars to the US economy with rural jobs, growth, revenue. But there's a gross lack of data available. So we had to kind of do our own a little bit. We had one partner in Wisconsin Watch who wanted to look at, should tribes diversify beyond casinos? Yes, they should. And so they tackled that, focused with the Ho-Chunk. They didn't have a lot of connections in the indigenous community. And so they actually went out and used some of their grant money to get a consultant to help run interference with the tribes, and particularly with Ho-Chunks, to get input access. It worked very well for them. I wouldn't say it works for everybody, but it was an interesting approach and it did work for them. We had a lot of green energy, renewable energy. There was a real narrow, we had to really be careful there was not going to be too much overlap. And I feel like we finally got there, but that was one of the tricky things is, if everybody had gone their own way, there would have been 3 of stories very similar. But we did one story on renewable energy that looked at how that's creating jobs in tribal communities and how it's having an impact on the broader communities. And we looked at solar, wind, water, hydroelectric that didn't involve dams that blocked the travel of salmon and things like that. And so that was one story that was handled by Investigate West. We had another that looked at the green energy and the problems that lithium mining can pose for communities. Lithium is one of the keys to having, electric vehicles. But if you live in an area where lithium mining goes on, it's going to really wreck your environment. And so we had one person tackle that specific story. That was Underscore. And then we had one looking at a story that has been done previously on uranium contamination, particularly in the Navajo area. And we had a reporter who had, their story was that there's a need for people who can do this cleanup and who can be trained to do contamination cleanup. There's a real demand for that, and that's a job creator for those communities, to be able to do it in their own community and then to go to other communities as well. We looked at a tribe that bought a sports team. We looked at cattle operations in a meat packing plant. We looked at the oil industry and its impact in North Dakota. Excuse me. We looked at, and then we had some of the partners were nonprofits that were members of INM, but we also incorporated some tribal media to get involved. Osage News came in and did a story looking at partnerships in their area and how that's created jobs for everybody. The tribes there have worked with county, local governments, and they all agree that jobs for one are jobs for all, and that's the important part of it. So it was an interesting story. We had one in Rawhide Press in Washington State looked at the problems that low wage jobs can cause for tribal members, because in a lot of cases they can take a low wage job, but they lose benefits. So it actually costs them more money to have a job than it does to not have a job. They can lose housing, they can lose childcare, they can lose a lot of support. So it was an interesting story. And the tribe after that one has had a real impact. They've decided to come back and change the policy because they realize this is not encouraging people to work. It's actually discouraging people to work. And that's really not what they wanted to do. And then we had the Muskogee Media did the cattle operations. And so it was interesting. Everyone had their own piece. When you put it all together, I thought it was a really interesting group. We were part of the project, part of the collaboration was to have a community engagement, public engagement. And that was in the middle of epidemic, the pandemic, and it really caused problems. You know, people had planned to have town hall meetings and that just didn't work, and elders didn't want to show up for events. And so Indian Country Today did a survey. It was a stab in the dark, and I thought it worked surprisingly well. We've done it again since, and we posted a survey. It was a Google form. It's really easy to do, and we put it on our website. And hey, we want to know what you think about jobs, and what's the best job in your area? What's the worst job? What do you think the job of the future is? How's your quality of life? What would improve your quality of life? We got I think it was more than 300 responses from 38 different states in the Washington, D.C. And most of them were tribal members or either living on reservations or near tribal areas. So we got a really broad base of reaction, and they were very consistent. Jobs of the future, without a doubt, was healthcare and green energy. Jobs that are there now that they don't think will be there, that they don't see as real jobs of the future: gaming, gambling, casinos, and oil and gas. And then what would improve their quality of life? A better paying job. And so, it was really interesting, and I felt like it was useful, and it gave us, I think it was affirming for the topics that we had chosen. And so keys for me in this project: you got to have one person. You need an editorial lead who can pull the pieces together and make sure everybody gets their part, but that there's a bigger picture taking place. Otherwise, you get a scattered effort, which is fine. But when you can pull all those pieces and all that effort together, you get a bigger story. And so I feel strongly about that. And it doesn't have to be me. It just needs to be somebody. So I feel like that partners need to be invested in their own work, and having those stories local to their community, but with the broader perspective incorporated, makes it relevant to the rest of the folks as well. So those were really key elements. And then give yourself a lot of time at the end, because it's going to get really busy. So some of the other collaborations we've done, we recently did one with Reveal, which was very eye-opening for me. It was on Indian boarding schools, and we had a reporter. Reveal approached us because we had a reporter, Marionette Pember, who has worked literally for decades on Indian schools and the problems with Indian schools. She's actually out on leave right now, writing a book about her mother and her own family's experience with boarding schools. So they approached us to do a podcast. We plan to do our own digital story, and it was really interesting. I didn't have a lot of experience with podcast investigations, and so it was interesting. It's yeah, there we go. There's the link. It just re-aired with a little bit of an update, I think, in the last 2 weeks. And so that was one where we were I was a little out of my comfort zone, but the basic reporting and editing and questioning of an editor didn't change, whether it was a transcript or a script or whatever it was. So follow your instincts on that one. And then we've had several with the Center for Public Integrity. I don't know if there are any folks here from the center, but one of the things, Indian Country Today has vast knowledge and limited resources. I'm not really kidding when I say that. So Center for Public Integrity came to us and said, we have this database. We have a big database, and a piece of they were doing a project on taxation issues. They did a project last year. One of them involved tribal taxation, and they had compiled a vast amount of information and wanted our input on shaping that into a project. I thought it turned out really well. It just won a CEBU award, business editing and writing. And so we brought in one of our reporters to help. And then we also tapped a freelancer, one of the partners from the INN project, the woman with Osage News. She's editor there. And so they did on the ground reporting in an intelligent way that brought those numbers to life and explained those numbers for people. And so I felt like it was a really interesting collaboration. I did data work for years. I just don't have the resources. And frankly, I've been an editor so long now that I don't really know how to use all those systems anymore. So I'd have to go back through boot camp or something to figure out how to do it again if I needed to. And so that was one where the pieces aligned really well. They had a whole lot of data and wanted some help illustrating it. we had people on the ground or knew where to find people on the ground to bring those stories to life. And so I thought that was an interesting piece. We've done a couple now with them. And then we also had one with the Marshall Project. We had a story of a death row case that was interesting from an Indigenous perspective. It didn't quite fit with their style, but they said, well, but we've got this other piece we do. And so we got a lot of help from their reporter I knew well on watch out for this, watch out for that. My calls on this showed this information. So we got guidance from them on some of the innocence issues. And then we did for them a life inside. One of our interviews that we did with the death row guy turned into a piece for them. And so that's one where we went in thinking it might be one thing and we came out something different, but I still felt like we benefited. I think both sides benefited from the collaboration. And we're able to turn that into something that worked for both of us. In fact, we've had some recent stories on the same case, and we keep bringing back up the piece we did with the Marshall Project. So that's one where we ran a little bit more than they did. They had sort of a structure on how they worked, and we did it a little differently, but not much.
We do have a comment in the chat there. Farah Warner says that another role that comes to mind is data for collaboration is data manager, someone who's really competent with data and interrogating all that data. And it speaks to Kate's comment that they've worked in various data-oriented investigations as a Wisconsin Watch reporter. And one of the big problems is that if the data set isn't like very obvious, in terms of how it's usable, then it's hard to figure out or determine whether there's a good story in there that's worth collaborating.
Yeah, I mean, that's really an issue. And that's one of the, I think one of the things that I brought to the table with the Center for Public Integrity is that I did data analysis for years and years and years. You have to understand it, and you have to understand what you would like to see out of this data and how to get it, even if you don't really know the system they're using right this minute to do that. And so I do think you need to have one person who can handle the data and say, but you need to have a partner on the other end who can say, let's look at this issue. What does the data say about this? Let's look at this other issue. And what does it say if we analyze it a different way? And that's really helpful. And I think we learn from their analysis and they learn from our questions, and we both benefit.
Awesome. We do have about 12 minutes left before the top of the hour, and I want to make sure we get to Q&A. If anyone has any questions that are burning through your skull right now that you'd like to ask, please do so. You can just unmute, or you can raise your hand and you can unmute. Oh yeah, Carrie, go ahead.
Hi, Joe.
Hey.
I'm thinking through, as we think through things like this, and especially as it sounds like you guys used a lot of resources from within your teams. So as we're thinking through like how to budget, how to decide who's doing what we have talent for, what we're gonna need, what did you find surprising in terms of either costs or needs that you didn't have, things that you would like, ooh, we would definitely put more in a budget for X, or we would definitely make sure that we had somebody with enough time to do Y? Those are things that, we've got a couple projects we're doing grant proposals on, but I'm trying to think through, like, what do I really need to budget for, both in terms of asking for resources and in terms of my staff's time?
We don't have Indian Country Today, now ICT, has limited resources. They devoted my time to the INN project and to the others, but it didn't stop me from doing the other stuff I did. And so, we don't have the freedom, the flexibility, the luxury to say, okay, go off for 3 months and do this and then come back. And we don't have that. And so there was a lot of juggling on my part, frankly, and a lot of right at the very end, it got really intense when we tried to deliver 10 stories within about a 3-week period, the final pieces. And then they were very flexible when I said, okay, I'm going to take a week off now, bye. And so we were just flexible about it. with the Reveal project, we devoted Marionette's time to that project largely. She couldn't, because of who she is, couldn't stop herself when a story would pop up. She goes, oh, wait, I have to write this. And so, but we largely were able to dedicate her services to that. She made a lot of trips. Reveal helped fund those. That's something that helped us because it took the financial burden off of us solely for these trips. She went up to Rosebud. She went to Marquette. She went to the National Archives. She did a lot of traveling and a lot of on the ground reporting, but because of who she was and how well known she is, she already had built-in access, which helped Reveal get a story they wouldn't have gotten otherwise. And so, I think you have to just measure how much is this worth to you and how much can you do. And if you can cut somebody loose who's the right person, it can work that way. And then as far as you're concerned, you're just going to work yourself to death till it's over with. And that's just journalism. Thank you.
I see you unmuted, Bridget. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to address your question, but if you have a follow-up, go ahead, Carrie.
Well, I have a follow-up, but it's probably related to it. And that's just this, there's always this question of what should we have people in-house doing and what can we actually get freelancers to do? Like it sounds like even on web content, maybe you could hire somebody to make sure all that web content comes together from the outside, but you can't have an outsider doing your freelance reporting because it's an insider who really understands that kind of thing. So that was my follow-up, was like, who on the team has to be doing this work versus like, what can you outsource? Go ahead, Bridget. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I think that actually gets to what I was going to answer to your original question. And Dianna, obviously, welcome your comments here too. The three things I can think about to budget for that have been surprising to me are the editing, travel, and then call it art, right? Could be visuals, could be photo, could be anything else. And of those three, I actually think that editing is one that has been really surprising to me. How much the collaboration participants appreciated having an external editor. And sometimes it's someone like Dianna at another news organization that's participating. Sometimes it's an entirely external editor we contract with for the project. And I thought there would be a lot of sort of nervousness about handing over your stories to the editor, but I think the clarity up front really helped with that. People loved it. And then the other thing I would say with these things, Carrie, is like, it depends sort of, are you trying to reach a national audience, for example, or are you collaborating with other local organizations? So like, where do you need to contract out, art can be so essential for getting your stories in front of lots of people. And so that's a place where having a freelancer might make more sense than someone in-house. And a lot of our participants used freelance photographers, but not necessarily freelance journalists or reporters. And then the reporters actually, when they were freelance, went on to do other reporting for those organizations. So it's also kind of an investment in where you want to go, even outside the collaborations. Dianna, I don't know if there's anything else you wanted to say. That really good question.
Yeah, I mean, I think with the Institute, with the INN project, a lot, as Bridget said, a lot of folks used freelance photographers. And I know at least one that used a freelance editor to handle the project before they handed it off to me. And so, I would play it by ear. I deal with a lot of freelancers. And so for the Center for Public Integrity, I knew Shannon at Osage News might be interested. It was right up her alley. And would she like to participate? Would she like to do it as a freelancer? She did it as a freelancer. I'd already worked with her. So I would be careful before you take off with someone you've never worked with before. But if you know somebody, I don't think it hurts to have freelance help in those.
That's helpful. And the editing was like total content, copy, story framing, all of that, or was it? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, we have time for probably one, maybe two more questions. If nobody else has one, I certainly have one, but I can talk to you both at any time. Does anybody else want to pipe up here and chime in? Okay.
Let me just say, for those of you who are trying to send me DMs, I'm having trouble getting them while I'm on this call. Send me an email and we'll chat. Dianna has two N's, Dianna@ictnews.org.
I will also, we'll also CC both of you on the follow-up email so that everybody can see the email address for you two, and then we'll BCC all the other registrations.
Great, good.
I have a question real quick, or at least I'd like to hear your thoughts on a particular topic that I think people sort of mention a lot when we talk about collaborations, but I haven't really seen an in-depth dive into how this can be managed. And it's my favorite thing, it's conflict resolution. Because, we've all sort of alluded to, yeah, well, it's inevitable, something's going to happen or whatever, but I haven't really seen any good guides or templates or structures for conflict resolution mechanisms or processes. And I know that literature and that, academic research and stuff exists out there in other fields, whether it's organizing or law, but I haven't really seen one for collaborative journalism projects. And I wonder if either of you or both of you could speak to any experience, insights, or cool shit you've seen that address those kind of issues at a collaborative journalism level.
Yeah, I would like to take that one on first, if you don't mind. I think it's key to have an editorial lead who's focused on the journalism, who's focused on the content. And then I think it's key to have a point person in each newsroom who is responsible for that person. And so there's one person who is making decisions based on the journalism and not on personalities and not on those issues and not on those things. And if the journalism isn't shaping up the way it ought to be, then that point person in that newsroom is responsible for dealing with that, so that you don't have one person trying to micromanage everybody's stories. So one person does the big picture, and then there's got to be a point person, and they have to handle all those things.
So you would say you would designate a person who is in charge of handling that, as opposed to, or not, maybe not opposed to, but compared with like defining a process up front with all the partners that they can go through in a sort of like, not arbitration, but some sort of regimented process. You're saying having a person whose job is, or part of their job is to deal with that, is the way you've seen it done?
It's not a person. I think each newsroom has a lead, a project lead.
Gotcha.
So there's the editorial lead, there's a project lead in each newsroom, and the issues get split between those. If there's a content journalism issue that the editorial lead has a concern with, that has to be dealt with. How they deal with it at that level, at the newsroom level, would really shift over to the project person. Do they bring somebody else in? Do they change their approach? Do they pull out? All those are options.
Thank you. Bridget, did you want to add anything? Or if not, we have one more question in the chat here.
I'll just real quickly say, to add to what Dianna said, I think a process would be fascinating. I do think this is why it's so important to have a written agreement up front that you can refer back to, so that when that sort of arbitration necessarily arises, that becomes your point of truth for what should be happening.
Thank you. Yeah, and I just posted in the chat as well. We had some, we've been putting together some templates that you can use. I reposted that. Question from Cassandra. Bridget, Dianna, have you ever worked on a collaborative project, knowingly or not, that didn't result in content or some other gain for your org or publication, where you just like, this was a wash at best?
Not yet.
Yeah. I can see how it can happen.
Okay. Let me see. There we go. Oh, there we go. Thank you, Carrie. I think if that's it is 12:58, and we had a 1 o'clock stop time. I'm certainly happy to talk about this for hours. If we don't have any more questions, I just want to thank you both. Incredible work. I love everything you do. I really appreciate hearing you talk about it. It's clear you're both passionate about this and really invested. Thank you to everybody who attended. And just a reminder again, you will be getting a recording, resources. I'm going to pull a bunch of the links and stuff from the chat, and I'll put it in a very nicely formatted email for you that you will receive within the next hour or so, as soon as it's done processing. Also a transcript that'll be auto synced to the audio with Otter. So all the stuff, if you want to write anything about this or anything, please share it with us. We're happy to help promote it and spread the word about it. Just thank you, everybody, once again, and take care and have a great week.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye, folks.